Well, we just watched that. That was very disheartening seeing all that again. You know, it's hard going through all that and knowing where we're at. I saw you a video or an interview of you recently. It's kind of like you had a similar childhood, you know, with nature and stuff. I didn't go vegetarian until 1996, but you were 6 years old when you started, and I didn't really get the dots connected from that from when you were 6 to when you went vegan. And I saw a couple of your what do you call it when you wear those outfits and racing uniforms?
The racing suit, yeah, it's a
Racing
three.
suits, yes, yeah.
It's a 3-layer Nomex suit that I could be in a fire for, I think, something like 45 seconds without burning. So, and
Yeah.
thankfully, my race cart that never happened. But
One has you in the vegan suit, and another one has you in 100% renewable. So I want to try to see if you could share your story from your childhood experience being vegetarian to going vegan, and then at some point it was ethical vegan, and then the renewable kicked in. And I'm not sure how that connects with your race car, your degree in school, race car driving, and then the Cove and this movie.
yeah, so I feel like I was always kind of an environmental activist from the time I was little. I remember, arguing with people about not recycling. I mean, I'm 49 years old now, so that was a long time ago. I ended up going to college for biology at UC San Diego and studying biology. I wanted to be a marine biologist, and I had this idea I was going to study dolphins and whales out in the ocean. And somewhere along the way, I had a bucket list item on my bucket list, which I started in high school, to drive a race car. I ended up having like a 10-minute conversation with a race team owner after I drove the race car. And he encouraged me to sort of pursue that as a career because I was fast on the track. And so I ended up pursuing that and running my first race in 2001. I started becoming vocal about environmental issues around 2006 when An Inconvenient Truth came out. Again, it's a documentary that sort of impacted me in a way where even though I was talking about the environment and animal rights and things to my family and friends, I wasn't kind of putting it out there because I was still trying to be accepted as a race car driver. And I was already kind of the odd one out as a woman in a race car in a garage that was, mostly men. And in 2006, when I saw An Inconvenient Truth, that was when I was like, it's not enough for me to talk to people that I know. I need to try and talk to the racing community about it. So that's when I put it sort of out there publicly that I was talking about climate change and our impact. And I started offsetting my carbon footprint with the rainforest adoption and speaking more vocally and actually putting it on my race car. And you can imagine the NASCAR community a lot of them weren't thrilled about me talking about these issues. But I think at some point I just thought I already don't fit in. I might as well completely be myself and be open about, at the time I was vegetarian. I went vegan in 2011. So it's been a little over 11 years. It was in the summer of 2011. And I really just started using my voice as a driver to talk about the impact that humans were having on the planet, whether it was animals or the environment. To me, it's all intertwined, right? You can't separate one from the other. It's respecting the life that we share our planet with. And I had been pitching the vegan race car and giving away the vegan food for years, and just everybody said no. they didn't think that the NASCAR demographic was a group to advertise to. And I was like, but if you want to grow the movement, you know, you don't need to advertise in Veg News. We're all already vegans and vegetarians reading Veg News magazine. Like, if you want to reach new people, you have to try and reach them in a place where you're not going to find a bunch of vegans and vegetarians. And for me, one of the standout moments was I was racing at Kansas Speedway, and there was I can't remember the name of the chain restaurant, but it's a chain restaurant that actually has a separate Gardein menu, like a fully vegan menu. And I decided I wanted to treat all of my crew to vegan chicken wings. So I drove across the street. We had a rain out, so I knew I wasn't going to have to be on track for a while. And I brought all these vegan chicken wings over, and you could tell the crew was like, oh no, what is she gonna make us eat? Some weird tofu thing. And they were really skeptical, and they loved it. All of them loved it and couldn't believe that it was vegan. And it was, you know, this chain restaurant using vegan chicken wings and just tossing it in different sauces. So I then had the dream of kind of doing that, but on a big scale, you know, giving it to all the race fans, having a big tent and giving away the food. And I pitched it, and every single vegan company just kind of slammed the door in my face. So it took me from 2011 was when I started pitching it until 2017, when I finally got the sponsorship to run a vegan themed car. And we gave away that first year. We did the Impossible Burger the second year, which was 2018. In 2017, we did vegan chicken wings. And it was so popular. So many race fans were coming through that we would have a huge line. Even some of the NASCAR media guys were coming up to the tent saying, we've never, like, your tent is by far the most popular tent. And there's this great picture that I took that was kind of a panoramic shot where I think it was like Johnsonville sausages had the display next to us. And then I had the Vegan Strong tent right there. And I did a pan, and their meat, they're trying to give all the way away all these like sausages and all this meat completely empty. And then I panned over to my tent, and we had a line of like 30 people waiting to get the Impossible Burger. So it was a huge hit. And I had a bunch of race fans, you know, writing to me through social media saying, you know, I went through your tent at Daytona. My dad and I have been vegan ever since. It was really high impact to be able to put the food in people's mouths, because I think, you know, a lot of people that are not vegan or not vegetarian, they think they're going to be sacrificing flavor. They think they're not going to be able to eat the things that they ate growing up. And when they realize that there's such great meat and cheese substitutes out there that they can still eat the way that they ate when they were a kid, and it's just a vegan version of that, that totally changes the game. So for me, some of the best memories of driving that race car and trying to impact people, whether it was running the Cove on the car and giving away the DVDs, giving away the vegan food, I think really stands out, as I was seeing a direct impact with my fans, with the people at the racetrack, and them actually changing and giving me feedback and saying, I've gotten vegan since going through your tent, or I've gone vegetarian. It was great. And I think the movie has a really good plant-based message as well. You know, it's not the whole focus of the movie, but we did try and have that be one of the takeaways that people had when they left the theater, or, you know, streaming now these days, thought, what can I do to have a positive impact? And I mean, changing the way we eat 3 times a day is the easiest way.
Yeah, you mentioned the Cove. A lot of people aren't familiar with that. Most vegans are, but that was a documentary. I think it was in Japan, where a village of people just corrals all these dolphins into a cove and slaughters them for, is it an annual thing? I don't know anything about it. Is that about the time you went vegan? Did that make you go vegan? Was it something like a big shift, or was it something else?
Yeah, I do feel like seeing the Cove kind of shifted my activism into high gear. Um, it was at that time that we rented the Cove. We saw it. It was for rent at a hotel that we were staying at, and we rented it. And I mean, the second that that film ended, I looked at my husband and said, you know, we're going to Japan. We're going to help Rico Berry end this. And that movie wasn't specifically focused on veganism. It was focused on, you know, what we're doing to our oceans and what we're doing to the creatures there and the cruelty that was happening to the animals. And they're, you know, they were force feeding this to the children in the schools, making it mandatory for them to eat this, you know, mercury poisoned dolphin meat. I think it was around that same time that I started to become more aware of the impact of the dairy industry and how cruel it was to the cows, and that it wasn't just this fairy tale uh, farm that they try and present on their marketing, that it's these cows out in a green grass pasture and they're just milking them in the mornings and this is how you're getting your cheese. So I think those things just happened to happen at the same time that I was becoming more aware of what the dairy industry was doing, and it wasn't specifically about the Cove. And there were lots of documentaries coming out back then. I feel like that was around the same time Food Inc. came out. I feel like there were a lot of other food documentaries. Forks Over Knives was around that same time. There's so many vegan documentaries, it's hard to keep them all straight. But I think my awareness was just ramping up at that time.
How much was your awareness of what happened in Racing Extinction? Because that was the first documentary I've ever seen that dealt with the extinction level event. I knew nothing much about it before that, and it was quite eye-opening when I saw that. That was 2015. So between the Cove event, what year was the Cove?
So the Cove came out in 2010, I believe. Well, it won the Academy Award in 2010. It might have come out in 2009. I started filming Racing Extinction in 2012. So after I saw the Cove, I reached out to Rico Berry. I became a volunteer. I started going to Taiji and actually documenting the dolphin slaughter, just same thing that they did in the Cove. And through meeting Rick, then I met Luis Sohoyas, who's the director of the Cove. He also is the same director of Racing Extinction. As we were making, you know, these efforts to sort of raise awareness around the Cove, I decided, why are we not marketing this to people who are actually buying tickets to SeaWorld? These are the people that need to know what's happening and the tie between the dolphin industry, the captivity industry, and the largest slaughter of dolphins in the world. And I just felt that the people that were going to SeaWorld or these dolphin parks didn't know that connection. So it was my idea to say, you know, we should raise the money and put this on a race car. And this is, you know, 90 minutes away from SeaWorld Orlando. And so it was through meeting Rick and then Louis that Louis then approached me and said, I actually have a job for you in the next film. And that was when I was at Daytona in the Cove car, told me he had a job for me in the next documentary. It didn't reveal to me what it was. I didn't know until months later. And at the time they had this mock-up of like a white van with just a projector stuck to the top of it. And you know, slowly over time, obviously that morphed into becoming the Model S Tesla that we converted into the mobile projection vehicle. Back then, there were really only two electric cars to choose from. It was either a Nissan Leaf or the Tesla. So I'm really, you know, I look back at all that time with very fond memories. That was sort of the beginning of the electric revolution. There were hardly any electric cars on the road back in, you know, this is 2012 when we started filming.
Oh, so the Tesla was 2012 at that time?
Yeah, this was 2012 when the Model S first came out. So they had the Roadster, which was essentially a Lotus body where they were just dropping in a battery pack. But the Tesla Model S was actually their first production vehicle. So at the time, I mean, Tesla was kind of up against great odds because there just wasn't a successful electric car company out there yet. Nissan had the Nissan Leaf, but that was kind of a very small part of their portfolio of cars that they sold. So using that car was, you know, there wasn't, it was either a Nissan Leaf or a Tesla Model S, and we thought the Tesla Model S looked a lot cooler.
Yeah, I'd like to have that car, actually, if they take a projector on it.
And I still have my Tesla that I've had since 2013. So it's actually 10 years old this month. And I've put on, I think, over 115,000 miles. We've got solar on the roof. So at home, I'm charging with the solar. Of course, if I do a road trip and I have to use the battery, the Tesla superchargers, it's not guaranteed that it's solar powered. But at the house, I'm just, you know, charging off of free sunshine that lands on my roof every day.
I know, somewhere I saw the statistic that 80% of the greenhouse gases are methane from, well, from, the polar caps melting as well as landfills that don't capture it. And cows mostly on the planet. And they say that's the fastest way to, fastest thing to clean up because it only would take 10 to 20 years. But since the film was made in 2015, that's 8 years ago, I've seen statistics change in a more pessimistic way for the number of the species that will be extinct by certain times is actually getting closer. And I see things even just in where I'm living in Florida that may happen as soon as 2030. And we have 50 plus endangered species right here in Florida. As we're really, it's a slow process trying to get people to change their minds.
It is.
Do you, since 2015, have any updates of data that you could share with us, from any source?
I mean, there are so many, there's over 1 million species at risk of extinction right now. There are species that are, blinking off the planet without there even being a media story about it. That scene with the frog, the Rab's fringe-limbed tree frog.
Yeah.
That frog, I went to go meet that frog. After we made Racing Extinction, I realized that frog was in Atlanta, which was only 4 hours from where I lived at the time in Charlotte. And I drove and have since become friends with his caretaker, who was terrified. I wrote a story for the Huffington Post that was called "The Loneliest Frog in the World" about that frog. His name was Tuffy, and he has since passed away, and the Rab's fringe-limbed tree frog is completely extinct. And he told me, every single time that he unlocked the door to that frog pod, he was terrified that he would find it dead because he knew it was the last known individual of that species. And they call if you know the actual last individual of the species, they call that an endling. I think it's the saddest word in the English language, an endling. So Martha was the last passenger pigeon. If you have the actual individual, it's called an endling. And he was so heartbroken over losing Tuffy that he has started a foundation called the Amphibian Foundation in Atlanta, where he's just trying to save as many possible amphibian species as he can. They're extra vulnerable because they actually absorb their hydration and their water through their skin. So if there's any sort of pollutant or fertilizers or chemicals that are in the water, in the runoff, it's going to go right through their skin. So frogs and amphibians are really, really vulnerable to climate change. And he said, I never got into this because I was worried about climate change or I was worried about extinction. I was just a fan of frogs and a fan of amphibians, and I thought that they were cool. And now I've become an activist myself because it's really just this all hands on deck situation where there's sheer panic, where when they went into that rainforest in Panama to grab as many species as they could because the chytrid fungus was coming in and wiping them out, it was almost like firemen running into a fire just to grab as many species as they could save. And unfortunately, they were able to get some of those Rab's fringeland tree frogs to breed, but they didn't know enough about the frogs to figure out how to bring those tadpoles into adults. So eventually the tadpoles died, and they ended up with actually 2 individuals for quite a long time, and they were both male. So they just had these 2 males, and they could do nothing with them other than try and raise awareness about what was going on. I don't think it's gotten any more optimistic since we made the film. I mean, I think it speaks volumes that the film came out in 2015, and here we are years later, and it's still, everything we said in the film is applicable still. If not more urgent, definitely more urgent than it was back then. But nothing has, I don't feel like things have become better in the way that I look at it being the future being more optimistic, other than I see more electric cars on the road. I see more people being vegan. I see tons of new vegan products every day. So my hope that people are changing has become more optimistic, but I'm just not sure if it's fast enough. But I do feel like there's been a huge shift in the number of vegan products. When we started bringing the vegan hamburgers to the racetrack, Impossible Burger wasn't in Burger King. Now you can drive through a Burger King and order an Impossible Whopper. That was just not something that was, possible back when we were doing this early activism, I would say. So I'm hopeful that people's attitudes are shifting and things are changing. I'm less optimistic about how fast we're acting. I think the Inflation Reduction Act is great for what it's done for clean energy. There's so many more electric cars on the road now. I just worry that it's like a little too little, a little too late.
Yeah, I know,
Just being honest. I know I should just
you're right on there.
be more hopeful, but I'm trying to be honest.
I think the one thing that we should have a documentary is on the human population, because they say that an average number of humans on the planet for the last several thousands of years is about 200 million up until 300 to 500 years ago. And the advent of not just the wheel, fire, and all these stone ages and things like that, but transportation, horses, carriages, and then roads, and planes and boats and trains in the last, and then it was the I don't know, I can't remember, I'm not good at history, but the Industrial Revolution that started about the food and agriculture, and now we went from 200 million on an average, tens of thousands, who knows how long, I wasn't here, to 8 billion about now, and 8 billion people with 1 billion pounds of, 7 billion pounds of meat being produced every single day. And what is the number on how many animals killed each year? Almost 1 trillion, including all the fish. And that doesn't even include the insects that everyone, else is eating, 1 trillion or more, animals. Our appetite's so bad that, but the problem is the population too, because we outnumber all the other mammals on the planet, except for domestic ones that we eat. We do outnumber them, but not combined. And there's probably about 7 billion cows, I think, slaughtered every year. So I don't know what we're going to do about the population thing, but I mean, we would have to flip a switch. Everybody would have to be eating plant-based overnight. It would still take 20 years for all this, the methane to dissipate and blah, 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 blah. I don't see how it's possible that we could turn this back in 7, 5, 10 years, even if we did that. But I don't know enough to say something like that with certainty. But I do wonder how, I think the UN passed a plant-based resolution, and so did the World Health Organization. By the way, we have pamphlets in the back before everyone leaves. Take one of all 6 of those back there. They're all related to plant-based diet on the environment. We would need to have plant-based resolutions at every city, county, state, and central government level at every government on the planet. A policy like that, like they're doing with these species, just to stop eating. I don't know what's going to take for that last straw. I think the last straw would probably be the effect that makes it stop without it continue without stopping. I don't like to see that, but I'm, going to be around 30 more years, I hope, and like to be able to do something about it. But I want to open up questions to the audience. Does anybody have any questions written down or want to take the microphone and ask? Leilani? Anyone? Does anybody have any questions? Oh, okay. Here.
Thank you so much for being here with us. What an honor to meet you and hear from you directly. I'm so inspired to see your activism and your energy and you're positive, even in being honest. So no fears about being honest. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Seriously. I guess my question is, in talking about food right now, seafood and vegan seafood and any leads on that. I'd love to. I just moved to Florida and seafood's big here, and I'm just wondering who's doing what. Do you have any recommendations for vegan seafood, and who can we help get behind to promote more of that? Thank you.
Yes, great question. I love that question because actually Luis Ahoyas, when he was making the Cove, he was actually a pescatarian at the time that he made the Cove, and then he had his mercury levels tested after realizing, the impact of how much the dolphins were poisoned by this mercury, and his mercury was through the roof. Louis now vegan. He's become a huge vegan activist. So yeah, seafood is, I feel like it's the last frontier with vegan food. We have so many burgers and chicken options, and seafood's been kind of the last one that I think people have touched because I think it's maybe harder than the others. I love the Gardein fish fillets. I don't know if you've had those, but it's a fish fillet that's frozen, that's made by Gardein. I think those are great. I make little fish sandwiches out of them. There's another group that is called, what is it called? Good Catch. Good Catch. And they make a vegan tuna that comes in like a little pouch that you can make into like a tuna fish sandwich, a vegan tuna fish sandwich. I use like Vegenaise. Delicious. I think there's more and more of those coming out. Those are the 2 go-to vegan seafood brands that I go to. I'm sure there'll be more and more of them coming out. I've seen a few others on the internet, but I haven't gotten a chance to try them. But that is definitely, I feel like, a little market that the vegan companies haven't quite tapped into, and I hope that they do. And I also wanted to just add, thank you for bringing up population. That's actually an issue I'm really passionate about, and I'm a patron for a group called Population Matters that talks about population. So it took us 200,000 years to get to our first billion people. And then it took us only 60 years to reach our second billion. And then it was 30 years to reach our third billion. And then ever since then, we've been adding basically 1 billion people to the population about every 12 years. So the population in my lifetime, I was born in 1974, was the year we hit 4 billion people. We're now at 8 billion people. So it's doubled just in my lifetime. I do think that's a really important issue we need to talk about. We need to make it more acceptable. Like my husband and I are child-free by choice. And we try and talk about that to just make it a little bit more acceptable to make that choice. Or to encourage people to have smaller families if they are thinking of having children, to maybe have 1 or 2 rather than 6 or 8. Obviously, that's sort of one of the driving forces behind all of our environmental issues. The more people there are, the more we have to cut down habitat, the more, especially with all the meat that we're consuming. So we add about 80 million people to the planet net growth every year. And while the population growth has slowed in some countries, the percentage is slowing. The fertility rate is slowing. When you have 8 billion people having 2.3 kids versus 4 billion people having 3.1 kids, I'm just making those are not the numbers. I'm just making the point that we're still adding around 80 million people to the planet net growth. More are born than die every year. So there's actually a great story about a nonprofit that was in, I think they were in Kenya, that Population Matters told me about. They had started out as trying to save species, trying to preserve habitat. And they realized at some point after several years of trying to plant trees and trying to protect animals and trying to protect habitat, that their population was growing so quickly that it was going to be impossible for them to actually save these wild places and these wild creatures if they didn't combat the population problem. So now they've pivoted and they're just a family planning organization, and they just 100% focus on that. I think that's a really important issue to talk about. Jane Goodall is also a patron of Population Matters. She talks about it. David Attenborough talks about it. But I find that a lot of environmentalists are apprehensive about talking about it because they feel that there's such an emotional reaction when you talk about population and having children, that I think a lot of them are just scared to talk about it. I am working on a new project with OPS, and some of the very first interviews that I did was at a population conference in Washington, D.C., where they had a gathering for a couple days that was just experts from over the world talking about this issue. So I think that's important to acknowledge that, and thank you for bringing that up.
I'm glad to hear something else is going on with it, because I'll keep my eye on it. Is that a social media page, the Population Matters?
Yes, it's called
Okay.
populationmatters.org, and it's based out of the UK. They have a lot of great patrons. There's a guy named Chris Packham, who I think he is a prominent, kind of like a David Attenborough, but like a younger David Attenborough. He does a lot of those wildlife television shows. Attenborough and Jane Goodall are two of the, highest level patrons that they have. So I was honored to join them a few years ago. I feel like there's not enough organizations talking about that, or there's organizations that acknowledge it, but they don't want to dive into it because it feels like an issue that people get upset about. And I know I got a lot of pushback. I did an interview with a French magazine, like a news magazine, that was just about my choice to not have children with my husband. And I was talking about, I had a biochemistry professor at UC San Diego that talked to me about population, showed us a short film about it in class one day instead of talking about biochemistry, and just completely turned my mind on to this issue. And that interview, I got thousands of people, mostly in France because it was a French news organization, but basically telling me, then you should just commit suicide, then you'd really reduce your carbon footprint. Like, it made people so angry. It was crazy.
Yeah,
and it made me realize that you have to be so careful about how you bring that up. So I've found a good way to start the conversation, when you're traveling and you're meeting new people, and oftentimes they're like, are you traveling for work, or is it business or work, or just for personal reasons? Are you going on vacation? Do you have kids? Is usually one of like the second questions that gets asked, at least when you're my age. And I always just answer, no, my husband and I are child-free by choice. And just by adding those two words at the end of my answer, by choice, I think it opens up a conversation, because they realize, oh, it's not that they wanted to have kids and they couldn't have kids. They actually made a conscious choice to not have children.
Mhm.
And it opens them up to say, oh, that's interesting. Why did you choose to not have children? And then it just starts an organic conversation. So I try and talk about it as much as I can, but there are still people that get very, very angry about it. And there's a lot of prominent climate change scientists and environmentalists that just sort of avoid that issue. So I'd love it if more people would sort of be brave and go into those scary waters and talk about that sort of unspoken. It feels like an issue we just want to sweep under the rug and not talk about.
Yeah. I actually would wear a shirt like that. Childless by choice for the planet or something like that.
Nice.
Maybe somebody has one already on Google.
I'm sure if you Google it, it's already on Etsy.
I got the notice from Zoom here. We got less than 5 minutes. Is there anything before they shut me off for my free trial period? Anything pressing that you wanted to share that you had in your mind before we go?
No, not really. I mean, I'd like to just thank you all. I know everybody's really busy, and thank you for taking the time to watch Racing Extinction. I spent over 4 years of my life working on that film and driving that car and projecting those images, and it was a real passion project, and we didn't know how many people would see it. We've since been able to make it free for all teachers, kindergarten through 12th grade, to screen it. And actually Discovery Channel, who aired it on television, they created like a whole education lesson plan that goes with each of the grades. So if you know any teachers or educators that care about these environmental issues, please let them know that it's for free. If you just go to racingextinction.com, there's a link that you can click that says education, and for free, you can screen that link. You can download the free lesson plans. And I think we've had over 2 million students go through the lesson plans, and over 15,000 teachers have downloaded the lesson plans. So it's been really successful. I mean, the goal of the film is obviously to raise as much awareness as we can with as many people as we can. So yeah, any teachers that please let them know to just go to racingextinction.com, and all they have to do is email us to get the free screening link for their students.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for coming out with us tonight. And when is this project you're working on with OPS and Louis coming out?
So I will say that it will probably be next year at some point. I'm still working on it. It's been a passion project of mine since before the pandemic, and I started filming it before the pandemic, and then everything kind of got put on hold during COVID, and I've picked it back up in the last year. So yeah, I would say look out for 2023, hopefully spring.
And just follow your page to find out, right?
Yes, it's about existential risk to humanity. So all the things that we're doing wrong that could take us out.
Well,
Really positive, not gloomy doom and gloom stuff. Just kidding.
Yeah. You always got to have some answers for everybody to follow afterwards. Well, thanks again for coming on with us tonight, and we look forward to following you. All right, take care now.
Thank you, everybody. Go vegan. Bye.
Bye-bye.